Andy at Kinder Kitchens, and we are a small bespoke kitchen company based in New Mills in the High Peak. And we've got another video today, and it's part of the design series. We're going to be talking about islands and peninsulas. So if we're at the beginning stages of thinking about replacing our kitchens or starting our designs, then maybe what we're going to talk to today about might be of interest to you. We're going to cover a few points. I've just got to check my notes here, but first of all, sizing. What size the kitchen has to be to actually get an island in or a peninsula in, and how they vary in terms of how easy it is to fit it inside a room space. Number two will be seating, so whether we're planning on putting seating on the island or whether it's just going to be for storage only. Number three is worktop sizing, so that won't necessarily affect your thinking if you're having quartz or granite, but for solid wood worktops, oak worktops, and laminate worktops and some other solid surface products out there, it may well affect it. So we kind of have to work around those sizes in those circumstances. And number four will be panels. So that's basically how we dress the back and sides of the unit, depending on just kind of how it's going to be and how the different styles of kitchen doors can affect how we panel around a unit, because most kitchen companies have a sort of set of designs and of panel sizings. If it's a painted wood, for example, you can't kind of just go chopping panels up because you'll have raw edges that you have to work around, and there's a few different methods of working around that, but it's a thing, so we need to think about. Also, cost, what the sort of different cost difference are of islands versus peninsulas. And finally, appliances in peninsulas, so if we're planning on putting wine coolers and that kind of stuff in there, and more importantly, if we're planning on putting sinks or hobs in islands and or peninsulas, and just kind of what the reality of that actually is, and the compromises that we put on that piece of worktop by doing that. So let's kick off with the sizing first of all. I've got a few designs here to show you the different shaped rooms, and there's a design and there's a picture for each one. But I guess the first thing, and probably the first thing that goes wrong for most people, is the width of the room. And a lot of people who are thinking about maybe putting an island in their room, they simply haven't got enough width in the room to do it. So typically, as you can see on the design that's in front of us, the room is longer than it is wide, and you can see that the island is the same shape. So if you look at the overall sort of worktop of this island, we can see that it's effectively the same shape as the room. So as the room up at one side is over 4.5 meters, but the other way it's under 3.5 meters. So obviously the island's going to go in the way that suits the room. And the length or the width of the island won't make that much difference, because it can just grow or reduce depending on how the room grows or reduces. But the width of it can only go so narrow until the island simply doesn't fit in there, or it's really hard to get around the island, there isn't enough space, or we've got to make the island worktop really narrow and it looks a bit awkward for its width or its location. And the sizes we're talking about, they're not necessarily just physically to fit it in there, but also aesthetically. If we move too far away from that, it'll look wrong. It'll look like it's been squeezed in, or it'll look too small in the space, or however it is. So the design that you're looking at now has obviously got a kitchen run down one side where you can see the sink at the top of the room, and then you've got the gap between that and your island, the edge of the worktop of your island, and then you've got the depth of that island across, and then you've got the space on the other side, and you can see there's a patio door down at the bottom of the bottom of the room in this particular case. And if we just run through those sizes, the depth of the worktop where the sink is a standard size depth, so that's 600 millimeters, and it's always 600 millimeters. It can be deeper. It can't really be any less than 600 millimeters if it's got drawers, appliances, dishwashers, that kind of stuff, because we can't really go under that 600 millimeter mark without doing that, or we haven't got enough room for our sink and appliances. So if we're basing it, generally speaking, off a 600 mil deep worktop, and then between that worktop and the next worktop, we ideally need about 1 meter. Now, you can go less than 1 meter. You can certainly take it down to 900, bearing in mind if a 600 door was to open in that space, you would kind of be stood slightly to the side of it, so you could still operate it. If a dishwasher opened, that would open 600 coming straight down, and yes, you can stand slightly to the side of it, but you don't really want it any less than 900 because it is going to feel a little bit tight in there, especially if two of you are working in the kitchen at the same time. Your drawers are coming out to about 450, so that would be half of that gap. So 900 is kind of the limit. You can in certain circumstances go a little bit less, but I wouldn't really base my design off it at the beginning. The island itself is going to be, if it's got seating on and units, and you can see on the island that you're looking at here, where that sort of small green line is, where my cursor is now, that's an appliance. So, and there's two 400 base units next to that, and at a standard depth, you're going to again need 600 millimeters. Then you've got the back of the island where the seating is. This particular island that we're looking at now is actually 1100, but let's assume it was 900, which would kind of be the minimum to get a unit in there, and then 300 millimeters of overhang on the other side to be able to sit at it. If you were having seating. If you weren't having seating, then you'd have a narrow unit under there or a shallow unit under there instead. But generally speaking, that needs to be about 900 mil. And if you're buying a breakfast bar in laminate or a breakfast bar in solid oak, it would be 900 mil. So you would be working to those. You can cut it down. If you've got a laminate worktop, it'll be post formed on two edges. That's going to be difficult to cut down. If you've got a timber one, that can be cut down. And then between there and the bottom of the wall where the patio door is, again, we can go a little bit less than 900 maybe on this side because we're not necessarily working on that side, it's just to pass through. But of course, we're going to bear in mind we've got stools at it, and typically when you've got a stool under something, you're looking at, I'm just sat at a breakfast bar stool now, you're looking at 200 mil to get the stool in, and if somebody's actually sat on it, you're looking more at about 450, 500 millimeters where the stool sticks out when somebody's actually sat on it. So to go much less than 9 only leaves us 400 mil to squeeze around the back of that person. So as a general rule, 600 mil for the worktop, 900 mil gap minimum both sides, and then the worktop itself, which is 900 or thereabouts, and that's going to mean that we need a room size of about 3.5 or 3.5 meters. The design that you're looking at now, you can see that behind the stools is less than 900 mil in this area here, and that's because the island's a bit wider, it's 1100, and they've sacrificed some of that space at the back of the stools in order to make the island a little bit deeper. And we can look at an image of that kitchen as well. This is a computer generated image, but it is a kitchen in real life. It looks fantastic. The island's perfectly proportional, and for this design kitchen, actually it works really well because we've got a usable corner at the top left hand side. The top right hand side has got a doorway in leading to into another room. The bottom right hand corner has got some base units in there, although they're at a slightly reduced depth because there's no appliances or drawers in there, so we can do that. And of course down the back wall we've got a patio door, and so the bottom left hand corner is usable as well, but only to end units on. So it's worked out super nice in this case, sticking to those dimensions. So just moving on, we're just going to have another look at a much narrower room here. So we can see if we look at the left hand side here where I've just opened that box, 2830, we'll call it 2.8 or just under 3 meters this. So we've lost quite a lot of that width, and you can see the compromise that's had to take place there. That the island that we've got in this room is only 600 or call it 650. By the time you've got your units in there, which is about 570 deep, and then we've got overhang, obviously. So the worktop overhangs the door at the front, and we've got panels on the back. There's an appliance in here, so we can't go any narrower. So our worktop will end up depth-wise in this case around about 650, 670, something like that. Again, if you were buying a laminate worktop for this rather than the freedom of granite, that this, if you're having granite you can cut it to whatever you want, or quartz. But again, if you were buying a laminate worktop for this would come, generally speaking, they produce 3 sizes or 3 depths. 600 for a standard run, and then if you want a post form on both sides, which you'll obviously need if it's going to be an island because you want the back edge and the front edge to be the same, then that would come at about 675 with most companies, and then you would have a 900 option as well. So you would end up with a worktop on here if we were doing it in laminate at about 675. So we've got our 600 where our hob is and our sink is for the depth of that. we can see by the drawing it's actually got the dimensions on this one. It's a 917 gap, so we've kept just above the 900. We've then got about 650 worktop, and then we've got 730 on the other side. So again, we've gone under the 900 here on the understanding that just kind of along the back here there isn't actually any seating anyway. We've just got one little stool at the end there where there is some overhang just for, and in this particular case they've got small children. This room's actually part of a kitchen diner anyway, so to the right hand side of the design where you can't see, there's actually a dining table there anyway, so seating's not so much of an issue on this particular design. And actually, even though it's quite narrow, one of the tricks of design when you have to have an island that's not very deep is to make it really wide, because then that gives the same look of a nice substantial piece of granite in your kitchen or whatever it is that you're putting on there, a nice surface area. So make it as wide as you can if you can't make it deep. And if we just look at a photograph of that kitchen, what is that? And that looks like a little cat in there, but if we look at a photograph of that, we can see actually there's adequate space to work in there. And actually I know from experience this kitchen finished super nice. They've gone for a two-tone colour there, which is a great idea. But there's enough worktop there. Remember, there's no sinks or hobs in there. We've got enough worktop there to easily work on there. You've got a little bit of space at the end so they can enjoy the outside space. Somebody can sit there while somebody's working in the kitchen, so you can share the space together and have fun. You can just see the corner of the table actually on that picture as well. That's where their dining room is. And it works really, really well. So can you fit an island in a room that's under 3.5 metres? Yes, clearly you can. There are some compromises that come with that in terms of the seating, but it's happened in this case and it's worked. So let's have a look at a couple of peninsula designs now. So first one I'm going to show you is a long wide room, and again this is a kitchen diner. So the far right hand side of the design as you're looking at it now, there's a dining table in there, a decent sized dining table, and that's where this family eats. But for sharing the space while you're cooking, having your children just having the breakfast, what we've done here is just put a small peninsula on. Now this room at 2,955, so we're just under 3 meters for the width of this room. And we can see we've got two tall housings over there. So these two units at the top that are stood on their own with the green front on there tells us that it's an appliance, and the cross that's inside the top of the unit there tells us that it's tall or it's a wall unit. So we've got a tall housing there. Now there's nowhere else in this design for those things to go. So it's a tall oven and a tall fridge in this case, and you can see by the general layout there isn't really anywhere else to put that. So that's pretty much stopped you from having an island in this room, because at 3 meters we've got units at the bottom edge where the sink is, and we've also got unit depth at the top edge. So this isn't a kitchen with units down one side and then just open to the wall on the other side. We've got units on both sides, and that's only going to leave us, well, if we've got 3,000 there or just under 3,000, we've taken 600 for that, 600 for that, which is 1,200. So that's only going to leave us 2.8 anyway for the gap in between. So by the time we tried to put an island in the middle of that, it just wouldn't work. So the peninsula's doing a great job here of creating that little bit of seating. When you stood at your sink and your dishwasher in this particular area, you can turn to your left and you've got more worktop space. Looks fantastic. We can have a look at the picture of that. It looks absolutely fantastic, and that's a great solution. The alternative, of course, being just running this worktop straight to the end, which would have looked featureless, and yeah, you've got some good extra space there. It's not offering any compromise to walking around the kitchen, so it's a great example of using a small peninsula where you couldn't use an island and creating a nice feature to your kitchen, extra storage, extra workspace. Perfect. So next we're going to look at a kitchen. So this is a kitchen diner again. The interesting thing about this thing is if you look to the left here where my cursor is, you can see this section of wall that's sticking out into the room. That's obviously where they've had a wall taken out of here. So the bottom half of this design clearly used to have a wall between that and the top half of the design. And this kind of black line that you can see running across the top, that's where the steel is basically that's running across the ceiling. So you've turned again, there's a dining room table in the top half of this room. But because we've got a nice width, you know, we've got 3.94 plus another 500, we've got 4.5 meters across this room, obviously minus the nibs that stuck out for where the steel's been put in. And you can see that there's a tall housing actually built round that, so it's sort of brought an end to the wall quite nicely anyway. But the peninsula is much bigger than the last peninsula, and the peninsula is effectively going where the wall used to be. So you're opening up your kitchen. You've now got the space to sort of see into the other side and share the whole space in one, which is a far better use of it rather than two small rooms. Feels much better, feels much more open. But you've also kept a large piece of worktop there that used to be where your wall was effectively. You've got all the storage inside. You can see there's no seating on the back of this peninsula either, because we've got units on both sides. And because this side's got drawers in, that's obviously the full depth side, and then the other side is just 300 deep. And we can see from the image of this, it's got timber worktops again, so you will have had this restriction of this sizing on the side to be 900 wide, so we'll have had to stuck that. Of course, you can go less, you can cut it down, but you can't go any bigger than that, or you can go bigger than that. You can start bolting two tops together, but it's quite hard to do, and it's not necessary in this case anyway. The gap between the two worktops in the middle, we've got a 900 range there, so that makes that, and there'll be two scribes either side to form these two corner units, which will together will make up another 100 mil. So we're ending up with about a metre gap again, same as we would do, but of course we haven't got to form gap around the other side of the island or at either edge, so bang for buck, we get a lot more worktop surface and storage than we would imagine if this peninsula was an island in the same spot. We would need a 900 gap to walk between where the oven is in this case and the island, and of course it would be tiny left there. So great example of where a big peninsula gives a lot of space, whereas an island would give hardly any, just because we'd have to leave that extra metre on the other side of it. And of course we can see by the image it's formed a huge piece of worktop, looks absolutely fantastic, great finish to it. Yeah, makes complete sense. So hopefully that gives you some idea of the type of room shape that you've got and how it would, and what kind of width you would need in terms of just marking that out. Remember, for each worktop on a wall we need 600. We need a 900 minimum gap between the island and the worktop. Then realistically, you know, it can be any width, but depth-wise, it can be a minimum of 600, as we saw from the narrow one, or 900 is more typical. Then another 900 on the side of that. So add those up. As a ready reckoning, we need about 3.5 metres on our room before we can really consider putting an island in, or at least one that's of any great size. So hopefully that gives you a good insight into that. Number 2 was seating. Obviously, you can see by this particular design, this has got units on the back. You could just take those units out on the back of these two 1100 units there, 4 550 doors. They could both come out, and that could just be overhang. As long as the overhang's less than a third, if you're on granite or something like that, it'd be quite stable, and you could have good seating across there. Or just take one out, make the island units less width-wise, and put a seat on the end, 2 seats on the back, take one of the units out, take both of the units out. Lots of options there as to create some seating around there depending on how many people you want to sit at it. Number 3 was worktop size. We've covered this a little bit when we were talking there, but again, if you're on granite or quartz, you've pretty much got complete freedom to make it any size you want, because it's going to just get templated to your kitchen units. If you work into laminates, remember those depths will be fixed. Now, if you're buying a laminate that's a square edge laminate, you can cut it down and put an edging on there, you know, a plastic PVC front edge. That's a good option. But if it's a post-formed laminate, and by post-formed I mean when it comes with that formica wrapped right round the front and sealed at the other side, so it's got that you know, pre-finished face on it, then it will come at certain sizes. So typically a 600 top, which is for a top only as post-formed on one side. Then you would to get your sort of 675 size, that would be post-formed on 2 sides, and then of course your 901 would also be post-formed on both sides. So if we were using that on this particular design, where the drawers are, it would be post-formed, and where the back edge there, where the 550 doors are, that would also be post-formed. Number 6 was sinks and hobs, or cost. Number 5, sorry, was costs. So the cost doesn't really make that much difference. if you're running a peninsula out like we're running out here, effectively it's just the same as running a peninsula around. If the wall was still in place on this design, it's just like running your kitchen round there. You've got to have an end panel at the end of your runs anyway. You've got to have an end panel at the end of your peninsula. You're obviously adding units and doors onto the other side, and even though the units are reduced, pretty much they're the same price, whether they're reduced or not. For someone like Kinder Kitchens, where we are, we would just buy that unit pre-made at that size because we make everything to order. But if you bought your kitchen from a supermarket outlet, one of the big supermarket outlets, you would have to buy a full depth unit and then start hacking it up, get your fitter to start. And if it's not got a solid back on it, it's going to be a bit rough, but it can be done. But either way, you're still going to be paying effectively the same price for the units anyway. So you can imagine the drawback side of this has got the expense of the units and doors, or draw fronts, and the worktop. Your worktop, obviously, if you're buying a deep one, is going to be a little bit more expensive. Granite wise, it doesn't make a huge amount of difference. Remember, when we supply granite, or a granite company supplies granite, the price is actually made up of about 4 components. You've got the template, which is a man's time, and the equipment for half a day. You've got the material costs of the actual granite. Then you've got the workshop time for that company to edge it all, polish it all, cut all the sinkhole out and everything, which of course is a big part of that cost. And then you've got a 2-man team for half a day installing it all. So if you kind of think about breaking the price down of your granite price, if you're paying £4,000 for some granite, by the time you break those 4 things down, actually the component cost, the actual raw cost of the material itself, of course, isn't probably as big as what you thought it might be. So to go from a 600 top to a 900 top, it could be that it worked out in the slab anyway, and it didn't really make that much difference. So you never quite know till it's templated, but generally speaking, it's not going to make a huge difference whether you're having a peninsula or just on an island for that matter, or just worktop. It's a little bit more expensive, but not for what you gain, for sure. So panels we were talking about as well. So when we make an island, let's suppose when we've got a laminate worktop that's 900 deep, and the units that make that up, there'll be a 40mm overhang on both sides. So if we started at 900, we can take 40mm off, we can take 80mm off, so our 900 becomes 820. Our units, and then if we want our panel rather to fit flush, which sounds a bit complicated this, but if you want it to fit flush to the front edge of your door, which is the neatest finish, then you're going to have to add about 25mm back on, and that'll leave you with a panel size that's hovering somewhere about 840, 850. Now, you can't necessarily get panels just cut to size, so somehow we've got to usually find a way to make a panel work, and there's various methods out there of kind of uni-mold type products that fit on the end. You can split the panel in half and router a clean cut on it and glue it together. Have to say, when you fix panels together like that, they can often look amazing on the day, but over time, sometimes it opens up a little bit after a few years later, and it's important to always remember, as I say to all my clients, a kitchen is about the user experience going forward, not just about how beautiful it looks on the day. So whatever method we're using, we need to make sure that it is got the longevity to last out, because there's nothing worse than looking at a bad joint on a panel or something, or not for me anyway. So something to think about there. There will be, typically, and that changes, those panel sizes all change between, say, like a gloss handleless kitchen or a true handleless kitchen and a painted wood kitchen. They change. So when you sit down with your designer, they'll probably explain that a little bit better than what I can, but it's definitely worth, there will be those compromises of panel sizing and so on that affect the size of the island or peninsula, whichever it is. So the last point I wanted to talk about was sticking hobs and sinks in islands or peninsulas. Now, I'll just say it, I'm not a fan of sinks and hobs in islands. I think if you're looking in a kitchen brochure, it looks amazing. It's in perfect condition at that time. The day of the installation, it looks brilliant. I'm actually sat in our showroom now making this video, and I'm sat right in front of a sink in an island in my own showroom. So it's not that we can't do it or we wouldn't do it, because it does look great, and it looks great in this showroom, it looks great on a brochure, and everything looks fantastic. But let's just fast forward that clock and look at that sink in 12 months time. The sink is the part of your kitchen that will age the quickest. You know, if you've got whatever it is, you can look at some of my other articles about inset sinks and undermount sinks and different sink materials and how fast they age, which one looks the best the longest. But ultimately, it's probably the dirtiest part of your kitchen. There's a bottle of fairy liquid, there's a load of old sponges, you've just poured a coffee pot in there. You know, quite frankly, this is the part of my kitchen I'm trying to hide, not the part I'm trying to present as the centerpiece to my kitchen. So for me personally, I think that putting a small sink in an island in addition to your main sink isn't a disaster. To put your whole sink in there, I understand that some designs require it, but for me, you know, when I'm sharing my kitchen with my partner and we're in there and one of us is sat at the back maybe working on my laptop, and to think there's a sink right in front of my laptop splashing water out and all that mess, that's not for me. I just think that, yes, it looks stunning in a brochure, but in practical terms, I'm not sure if it's a good idea. If it was a hob, same applies. I mean, you're not going to sit right at the back of it. If it's a 900 island, you have got 300 millimeters between where you're sat and the start of the hob. If we imagine I know we're not cooking steak every night, but if we imagine a griddle on there cooking a steak and all that hot oil flying out, no, that again, it just feels like, yes, it looks great in a thing, and you know, with the modern induction hobs as well, looking so slick. It looks fantastic, but there's a real practical compromise there that I would urge anyone to have a think about before they do it. I'm not saying I wouldn't do it, and we have done it many times, you know, if that's what the client wants and that's what the client's getting. But I always make that point of just have a think about that going forward. Certain circumstances, family situations are going to be a lot better. But, you know, certainly if you're going to be sitting kids at the back of an island, you know, if you have seating on your island or peninsula, you don't really want a hob in the way, not unless you have to. So some kitchen designs, especially some of the modern spaces that we deal with these days, kind of has to happen because they've got huge windows in the wall, or, you know, a lot of times when people open rooms up, there's not actually much wall space left to put the kitchen on, and, you know, big windows, you end up kind of having to put things in an island. And if that's the case, that's the case. I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm just saying be mindful of those things. And again, going forward, you know, your hob and your sink, particularly sink, are probably the thing that's going to age the most. So, and look sort of the oldest, the first. Whereas your centerpiece for your island, or I know in my own kitchen I haven't got an island, but I've got a peninsula, and I love sitting at that peninsula. I would hate it if I had a sink on it. So there's some things to think about there about islands. I'm going to do a written version of what I've just spoke about, which sounds like it's going to take me a long time to type out, but I'll have a go at it. And I'm going to carry on with the designs. I'm going to do another video next on different types of doors, so timber doors and gloss doors and longevity. Going to cover some important points there about where we're based. There's quite a lot of stone cottages, there's a lot of damp knocking about, so I'm going to cover some important information there about longevity indoors if you've got a damp room or that kind of stuff. So if that's something that you think could be interesting to you, then by all means check out some of my other videos and articles, and until then, goodbye and thanks for listening.